Great afternoon. You are in the Fast Lane with Sarah Jane, and today I have a former writer for The Tonight Show and comedian who actually speaks on suicide prevention and knows what the barrel of his gun tastes like. Please welcome Frank King into the Fast Lane with me today. Welcome, Frank. So this is not a laughing matter, but you are a comedian who speaks on suicide prevention. So how did we get here?
Yes. How did you get from A to B? That's good. Sarah, that is almost always the elephant in the room when I speak. And so I try to address it early. I've taught comedians because I've been a comedian full time since '85. And I tell them, look, if there's something odd, you're big, you're small, you're thin, you're tall, whatever it is, you need to address it right away, because the audience, part of their brain is trying to figure out, So what I tell people is I think a comedian's a good choice, and here's why. The world's first comedian was a court jester. It was his or her job to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. And I believe as a comedian, I speak truth to the power of mental illness on behalf of those often locked in its grip with humor. I believe where there's humor, there is hope. Where there's laughter, there is life, and that nobody dies laughing. And depression and suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt, several years later, died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4.
And do you remember that?
Yes. And therein lies a tale. I didn't remember it until decades later, when a cousin of mine helpfully turned the key and reopened that part of my brain. Well, because what happened was, in my mom's generation, they didn't talk much about mental illness out loud, even though it was rampant in the family. And so after I screamed for days, after we found my great aunt, my mother said, we need to make up a story. We need a legend, a myth, so that and she was hoping I wouldn't remember, which I didn't. But she said to the rest of the family, look, if he ever asks, then this is what we're going to tell him. And it was a very benign story compared to the actual event. I mean, the event, when we found my great aunt, is horror movie gruesome. It's in my first TEDx talk called A Matter of Life or Death. As a matter of fact, it's the reason I got the TEDx talk, because when you audition for TEDx, you can either give an overview or give them a slice of the talk. And I gave them a slice involving my mother and I discovering my great aunt. And I mean, they were apoplectic. So but I think I was in my early 50s, and my cousin owns a restaurant in North Carolina, and I was back there speaking, and I was going to have dinner at the family restaurant, and somehow I got talking about my great aunt. And I repeated the myth about the sort of benign version. And he goes, what? My Fanny, she? And it all came rushing back.
Really?
I was there again. I was right there again. And so that was the good news is that was part of the reason I always wanted to do comedy, but make a difference, make a living and a difference. And the way you do that is you become not a funny speaker, but a speaker who's funny, and you teach people something. Meeting planners after the last recession said, Frank, we love you. We can't pay you that kind of money just to be funny. You need to teach our audience something. And I'm like, what do I got to teach them? I read a book by Judy Carter called The Message of You, Turning Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. Went into it thinking I got nothing. Halfway through, I remembered the story that my cousin told me. I looked at my family history, more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. And in 2010, after a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. So I had a personal, what they call lived experience. I thought, if I study suicide prevention, take some classes, I can keynote on suicide prevention because I've got lived experience. My family has what they call lived experience. Mm-hmm. And then I can teach them signs and symptoms of depression, thoughts of suicide, what to say, not to say, what to do, not to do, and find resources. So that's when I speak, the heart of the curriculum is spotting signs of depression, thoughts of suicide, because 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 people who are suicidal give hints in the last week leading up to the attempt, which tells me that the vast majority of people in this situation want somebody to notice and interrupt. And so I teach them how to spot and what to say, how to ask. So that's how I got from comedy to being the mental health comedian, speaking on. And the stories I tell are not jokes. It's funny. For example, I said I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Well, a friend of mine is in the audience. He never heard me say that out loud. He comes up afterwards and said this, and I quote, "Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed?" So that's the kind of thing, that's where the humor is. Now, people have busted me, how can you make fun of people who are suicidal and mentally ill? Well, in comedy, there's a rule. You can make fun of any group to which you belong. And I have 2 mental illnesses. I have major depressive disorder, which means that, better known as depression, but with major depressive disorder, it lasts anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks, depending on who you are and how your brain works. Yeah. And it recurs like a flat spot on a wheel. It's generally not situational. It's just a cycle. I've been most depressed and suicidal at some of the best times in my life. I always wondered, worried, what's going to happen if I get this depressed and suicidal? And it's the worst time in my life. And of course, I found out when we filed bankruptcy. So, and I have something called chronic suicidal ideation, which is far more rare. It means for me and people in my tribe that the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, when my car broke down a couple of years ago, I had 3 thoughts unbidden: 1, get it fixed; 2, buy a new one; 3, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. Now, the upside of that, silver lining, is every time I've spoken since 2014, there's been at least one person in the audience, sometimes more, who has that condition. And they have no idea it has a name. They just think they're some kind of freak because of the way their brain works, and completely alone. I did a college, young woman came up after the college presentation and said, "Thank you for your keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She goes, "But I got to tell you, it made me weep." "How did it make you weep?" She goes, "Well, you know the story about the car, get it fixed, buy a new one, just kill yourself." She goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. I had no idea it had a name. I thought it was just some kind of freak and completely alone." And when you said that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life, I am not alone, and I wept. So that's how I went from, telling my first joke in 4th grade, when everybody laughed, including the teacher who was hysterical, to the 12th grade talent show, did stand up, won, and then my mom made me go to college. So 4 years of college at UNC Chapel Hill. And then as soon as I got out, my first wife and I moved to San Diego. There was a comedy store there, a branch of the world famous one up on Sunset in LA. And I did my first open mic night, and inside my head, halfway through of my 5 minutes, I heard this: "You're home." And that was the beginning of the end of my insurance career and my first marriage. But that's another story.
So then, if you knew you wanted to do comedy at a young age, did you have any depression, or did you have any suicidal thoughts at a young age, or when did that start?
No, actually, even though my dad died when he was 40 and I was 8.
By accidentally?
Heart attack.
Okay.
Yeah, he had they believe, because it was 1964, couldn't really tell. He had a heart attack, and they when I turned 25, I had my first echocardiogram. And what I've been told was a murmur all my life, turns out was a bad heart valve. The heart valve is supposed to have 3 leaflets like this. And he had, they believe, and I had, a bicuspid aortic valve, meaning I'm missing a little leaflet, which means there's turbulence and backflow and it wears out faster. They believe that's what he had because it runs in families and often from father to son. So that's why he died. He died at, like I said, at age 40 of a heart attack. But my childhood, my mom is there are things worse than having one great parent. And she had good friends. She gave state board exams to nurses. And so when my dad died, the nurses did what nurses do. They rallied around. I've got a keynote called "Everything I Need to Know I Learned from a Nurse." And at one point in there, when I'm talking about how every Thanksgiving, Christmas, Pop Warner football games, concert, there was my mom and at least one nurse friend. They say it takes a village to raise a child. No, give me a couple of shifts of good nurses. We can get it done. By this point in my keynote, I'm crying. The nurses are crying.
Oh.
Because that's just, that's just the way they operate. So, but I was happy all through high school. I almost stayed an extra year. Back then, you could actually stay an extra year in high school if you wanted to. I needed some really intensive work on my math skills because I had a bad algebra teacher. And if you have a bad algebra teacher in 8th grade, it's just ugly from that point on.
Yep.
So I was going to take trigonometry again. I was going to take some more Spanish. I wish I'd taken typing now, since we all do this all day long. Mm-hmm. But my first wife said, "You'll be behind." You get to college, you find out, there's a 4-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 6-year plan, a 7-year plan. So anyway.
So then your mom didn't have any depression either?
Well, I believe she did. I don't know if it was situational because my dad passed away so early or whether she had the family gene.
Sure.
She killed herself slowly with alcohol and cigarettes. She wasn't an alcoholic in the beginning. She was, that generation where you came home and had a beverage, an adult beverage in the afternoon after 5 o'clock. And you do that too many times, too long. Sure. And I think it eventually she became an alcoholic, and then she smoked 3 packs of Terrytons a day. Mom, why are you smoking the Terrytons? Because they got the charcoal filters. Oh, for the health conscious smoker. Oh yeah, everybody in my family smokes except my sister and me. And when we go back to the family reunion, all those people get together and make my sister and me stand outside.
You and your sister don't smoke?
No, which is amazing because we grew up in North Carolina where everybody smoked. Cigarettes were cheap, but I tried it. My sister tried it. Yeah, Fortunately, we didn't. But I'm amazed that neither one of us have lung cancer because my mom in the house, all closed up.
Yeah.
3 packs a day, car, 3 pack. I mean, lighting one off, chain smoking, lighting one off the other. Yeah. I mean, she loved her cigarettes.
Wow.
Well, as people say, I've heard it said that when you pull in a little cigarette, what your brain is saying is, this is just for me. This is just for me. Because she has so much other responsibility, 2 children in the 60s as a single mom. That was very rare back then. She's only a single mom in the neighborhood. And so I think, it was difficult. And that's the way that's how she medicated. Mm-hmm. In the evening, she'd have a toddy and a cigarette.
And she never got remarried?
No, because she was a lesbian. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Really?
Yes, both my mom and dad were gay. I'm working on a TEDx talk called "Gay in My DNA." So because both parents were gay, and there is some evidence that
when they were married to each other.
Yeah, they met in high school in the late 30s, 1930s. They were crazy about one another. Both gay, both wanted desperately to have a family, and they enjoyed each other's company. So they got married. They tried to adopt, but back then there weren't a lot of infants to adopt. So they decided to try it the old-fashioned way against nature, in their case. And my mom actually got pregnant, carried it to term. It didn't survive. Got pregnant again, carried it to term, didn't survive.
Oh no.
And somewhere found the courage to try again. And I was born, and again, my sister was born. And so when people ask me why I don't kill myself, one of the reasons is because my mother worked so hard to get me here, so brave, that I've got to be at least as brave and work at least as hard to stick around and not cut it short.
So give me goosebumps.
And usually by this point in the keynote, I'm crying because yeah. Well, so she only saw women, but I didn't realize that until after she was gone. My second wife, who's still my wife, 33 years. She was in town when my mom was winding down, at the hospital in the nursing home with cancer. And so years later, 89, 99, probably 20 years later, she said to me, "Did you notice that everybody who came to see your mom at the hospital when she was dying was gay?" I go, "Yeah, those are her friends." When you're a kid, you just accept things as they are. And so my wife goes, now she's leading me down the primrose path at this point. She knows where she's headed. She just wants me to stumble on it myself. She goes, well, did she have any special friends? Anybody, who maybe came over all the time? Well, yeah, Miss Cheek used to come over every Wednesday and spend the night. And she goes, and where did she spend the night? And I went, it all fell into place. So she said, my wife said to me, look, your mom still has Audrey, a friend of hers. She's the only one left alive of that core group. So when you're back in North Carolina, when you guys go to lunch, because I know you will, just ask her, And so I went to lunch with Audrey. And I said, Audrey, look, everybody else is dead. Nobody really cares but me. And if you don't want to answer this question, don't feel like you have to. Mm-hmm. I said, was my mom gay? Now, Audrey at this point is 84. She goes, duh. Yeah, she goes, it wasn't like a flaming romance. It was just comfort. They were just comfortable with one another, and your mom had lost her, the love of her life, essentially, her husband, even though she, they weren't, they were both gay. And so it makes my parents, well, and my dad, as I look back, worked in a clothing store, was a window dresser. He set the windows up in the store, did all the pen and ink drawings of all the fashions, never kept a suit. If there's 2-button suits went out and 3-button suits came in, he gave the 2-button suits to Goodwill and bought 3-button suits, jackets. I mean, he did everything but give me a crate of Judy Garland records. But he was so anyway, that's
wow. Yeah, I'm glad that she found happiness, though. I'm glad that she didn't spend the rest of her life alone.
Oh, that would be sad. And of her, there were 3 siblings, my aunt, my uncle, my mom. And my aunt was married miserably for over 65 years. Oh. And my uncle, same thing. But the only couple that was actually happy was the gay couple, and the husband dies at 40. It seemed, unfair because they were so happy with one. I mean, it wasn't like Shangri-La, they argued just like couples do, but nothing like the horrible, horrible marriages that her siblings had.
So let's talk about when you noticed the depression.
Oh, I married my first wife was my high school and college sweetheart. And we dated all through high school and then went to different colleges, opposite sides of the country, but we're able to maintain the long distance relationship. And when you've been dating since high school and you get through college and you get out, it's either pretty much get married or go your separate ways. Yeah. So I've got a joke in my act. Anybody else here besides me I got engaged by ultimatum? My first wife said to me, look, we're too old to keep dating. We were 22. I'm not going to live with you, which would have been my choice, Sarah, lease with an option to buy. Either marry me or I'm gone. And that's how I got engaged. Okay. Terribly romantic. And as I'm walking down the aisle, I know it's a mistake. My intuition is screaming, get out. But in my head, when I said to the minister, I do, in my head, I heard, I'll give it a try. I know now you don't try marriage, you try grape nuts for a couple of weeks, So yeah, I wasted her time. I wasted my time. She's a wonderful. Was she
thinking the same thing though? Like when you got married, was she thinking the same thing you were or not?
I have a feeling, well, we shortly after we got married at a training, I went to Seattle to do some training with the insurance company I was working for. She had relatives there, her grandparents were there. So she came up with me and she spent time with her grandparents. And then part of the training, they brought the spouse in. You kind of give them an idea what the business is like, what's going to happen, and the time commitment. And they had a session on goal setting for the couple. And so they had us each write down our top 10 goals for the relationship. And then trade papers. And not one of the goals on those papers was the same.
What?
Yeah, we should have just said, you know what? We need to call this a day. Yeah, and so, but we, I mean, I wanted to be a comedian. She wanted an insurance man for a husband because that's what her father did, her grandfather did. Very sort of young and upwardly mobile. You get married, then both go to work, and then she gets pregnant, has a child, maybe another, and then not working. and not working outside the home. And then when the kids go to first grade, then you go back to work part time. That was kind of her, she'd mapped it out. And nothing in there, no mention there of comedy, which I understand. So anyway, I'm married. My fourth TEDx talk is called Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking. Because when I was 23 or 4 years old, I realized I was depressed and suicidal. And I thought, if I don't do something, change something, because I was married and miserable, even though she's a wonderful woman. I was selling insurance and miserable, great business, just not for me. And I was not going to the comedy store to do open mic night, which is where I thought I belonged, and miserable. And I thought, if I don't do something, I'm going to kill myself. And my second thought was, well, wait a minute. I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. And I think it will. But if it doesn't, hell, I can still kill myself.
Oh my God.
And yep. And I thought I was the only one who ever thought that way, as most people with mental illness do. I'm sure I'm the only one that ever thought. Well, I bumped into half a dozen people since then, entrepreneurs, entertainers, who had the same basic thought process, living a life they felt like was somebody else's. They had a dream they weren't pursuing, and they realized, I'm depressed and suicidal. If I don't change something, I'm going to kill myself. I've got a female comedian friend. We had a conversation. She goes, do you want to know the real reason I started comedy? Sure. She goes, I'm working in Washington, D.C., got a great job with an association, but I hate it with a passion. My only joy, 2 nights a week, open mic night. And she goes, I know in my head that I should be a comedian. That's what I was born to do. But, and then said I was depressed and suicidal. And I said, let me finish this for you. And you thought, what the heck? If I'm going to kill myself, if I stay put, why not quit the job, try comedy? If it works, great. If it doesn't, I can still kill myself. She goes, how do you know that? Know that I lived it. So it turns out there are other people who had the same basic thought process. So that's when I became aware of my depression and thoughts of suicide. Because up to into high school, I was a little lovesick during college, and I may have been depressed, but I thought it was because she was so far away, and we're going to different colleges, and maybe it won't work out.
Yep.
So anyway, so suicide is and the chronic suicidal ideation, ironically, helps keep me alive, because suicide is not so much about ending your life, killing yourself. It's more about ending the pain most times. And because I know I can kill myself at any moment, I've crossed that barrier. I can stand a great deal of pain knowing that I can bring it to an end anytime I want to. So ironically, my suicidality helps keep me alive. And it has other benefits. We had a wildfire late last year, September, and it came within 1.25 miles of our house. And they'd evacuated the neighborhood. But I was downtown when the evacuation happened. And I get an alert on my phone, neighborhood being evacuated, called level 3, get out. So, but I've got 11 rescue cats in that house, in the path of a wildfire. So there's no way, we're like the Marines, we never leave animals behind. I drove back into a wildfire to load the cats, not knowing if we'd get out. Going in, didn't know if we're going to get out. And I've got a whole new respect for the term herding cats. I push one in the carrier, 2 jump out. I'm like, don't you guys understand? It's getting darker outside. And I made a little video leaving the neighborhood. Said goodbye to everybody. My wife, my sister, my friends.
Oh my gosh.
Thinking and sent it before I knew, or as I realized I was going to get out, but I had it, sent, so that if the worst happened, they would at least know, what happened. Why did you drive back into a wildfire? Well, and so a friend of mine said, well, you could have been killed. I've been trying to do that to myself for 40 years. What do I have to lose?
Wow.
And if you're going to go out, by God, you might as well go out doing something, really heroic, like he went back in to save the Kikis.
Very heroic.
So suicide, it's one of I believe my comic ability and creativity, imagination, just the flip side of my depression, thoughts of suicide. It's all the same brain. Because I can teach you to write stand-up, I can teach you to perform stand-up. I cannot teach you to process the information the way my brain does as a comedian. Because it is like heckler lines. People heckle me, and I come back with something. Woman's leaving the comedy club. She's been drunk. She's been give me a hard time all night. They finally threw her out. She's on her way out. She turns back to me loudly in front of the entire audience and screams, "F you!" And I said, "Not even for practice." And got a standing ovation. And people ask me, well, how'd you think that up? I didn't think it up. It just came out of my mouth. I have no idea where it came from. When you heard it, I heard it. But I believe that's all part and parcel of that. And that's my third TEDx talk, mental with benefits, because I kept meeting people who are mentally ill, who also had some amazing ability, singer, entertainer, writer, painter, musician. They had this, it's like disability, but also this, and 30 Fortune 500 companies, according to 60 Minutes last fall, are hiring people on the spectrum for their one specific ability from the autism spectrum and paying them handsomely for that ability. So I think the tide is turning where people are realizing, these things aren't necessarily just a disability. There may be some ability that comes with it.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that having can you say it? The chronic, how do you say it?
Chronic suicidal ideation.
Okay. Do you think that having that makes you live life a little more to the fullest? Because you went back to rescue cats, not knowing if you were going to live or not. Like, do you think maybe you live a little more because you're not afraid of dying?
That's right. You're on the edge. Yeah. Like I said, you could have been killed. I've been trying to do it for 40 years. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Because really, a lot of people wouldn't do that because they would be scared, but yet you do what you believe in and you do what you think you need to do, and you're not scared. So you've removed that fear. So are you living a little better?
I think so, because the next thing he said to me was, you could have burned alive. And I said, no, that's not the way I'm going. If the fire had been licking my toes, I have other ways to go. I'm choosing my way. I'm not going to burn alive. That's no way to die.
Sure.
Yeah, we have handguns in the house, and if the house is burning down around me and I'm going to die in a fire,
wasn't going to happen.
No. Did the fire kill him? No, apparently not.
Well, then
again, because I'm willing to do that, I can go into a fire, and if it gets too close,
right?
Well, I did my best.
Interesting. So then I really like what you said about how your mom fought so hard to have children, and so you need to be here. I really like that you say that, and that shows a lot of respect that you have for your mom as well.
Oh yeah.
But what my question is that when I am not an expert in this at all, so I am truly asking for my knowledge. When a person does commit suicide and they aren't leaving a note, what are they kind of saying, like, you should have seen this coming, or they don't want to explain it, or what do you think is the reasoning behind that? Because people are very upset. Like, if someone takes their life and they don't leave a note, people are, I've heard this many times. Why didn't they leave a note? Like, they're so confused by it. What do you think is behind that?
Well, I think they didn't want to, chances are they didn't want to die. They just wanted to end the pain. Mm-hmm. And you also hear people say, why didn't they, there was never a hint. He never said anything. I never noticed anything. I would have done anything for him if he just told me he was suffering. I didn't tell anybody until I was 56 that I was depressed and suicidal.
You went from 23 to 56 without telling anyone?
Yeah. And the only reason I told them was I did my first TEDx talk and I came out on stage as depressed and suicidal. Nobody knew. When my wife got ready to play the video on YouTube, when it posted, I said, look, stop, don't hit play yet. I need to tell you 6 or 7 things about me you don't know. I just don't want you to learn them staring at the computer watching YouTube.
Wow.
We oftentimes mentally ill people keep it to themselves. Don't want to be a burden. Even if I tell you there's not much you can do about it. So that's why in my keynotes I teach, well, then how do you spot the signs of depression, thoughts of suicide? Because there's certain behaviors you can, once I've taught you that, it's hard not to see it in someone. I did a thing for dentists a year or 2 ago. And one of the signs that somebody may be considering suicide is they're getting their affairs in order and they're giving away their prized possessions because they want to make sure they go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone. So this dentist, there are two dentists in the story, but they are both at the same presentation. So dentist number 1 is downsizing. he and his wife, the kids are out, married, on their own. So, they're going to get rid of the 2-story, 4-bedroom, whatever, and buy a little ranch, And so something's got to go. There's no way all this stuff can end up in the, in the new house. So he's posting on Facebook. He's giving away stuff. I mean, good stuff. So he gets a call from the other dentist. There's number 2. Are you okay? Why would you want to know if I'm okay? Well, you're giving yourself away, and I know how much you love those golf clubs. And Frank said, one of the, oh man, that's so sweet you called. No, we're just downsizing. Do you want the clubs? So, yeah, as to why they don't leave a note, I do think that's a little unfair. But because here's what, even if people leave a note, people still have unanswered questions like, why didn't they tell me? Why didn't I notice?
Yeah.
Was something. And then they have what they call survivor's guilt. I should have been nicer to them. I planned to have a beer with them that night, but the kids need to get picked up from softball. So there's even a thing called suicide postvention, where you get together with everybody who knew the person who died by suicide, family members, friends, fellow employees, and you decode the suicide. Because everybody's probably got a piece or two of the puzzle, but nobody has the entire puzzle. So each person talks about, their relationship with the person, and if they noticed something along the way which seemed benign at the time, but now in retrospect. So when you put the entire puzzle together and you back up, it's almost always, oh, look at that right there. I mean, you can see it coming. It's just, but nobody had all the pieces. So it's, and by the way, they're trying to change the vernacular in the mental health business from committed suicide to died by suicide or completed a suicide, because the word commit has some pretty heavy duty baggage. You commit a crime, you commit a sin, you commit adultery, you don't commit cancer or diabetes. Sure. So they prefer it as died by suicide or completed a suicide.
Okay. So what are some signs that a person, obviously I'm going to go down this road, and not that this is a great route, but I have 3 young boys, and young suicides are definitely on the rise. So what is something as a parent I can do or I need to look for to make sure that I'm not missing something?
Okay, well, let's start with the signs of depression. Because depression is the number one cause of, it's tied number one cause to suicide. And the depressive state of bipolar disorder, it's manic, hypomanic, depressive, is even more dangerous. I think because the distance between manic and depressive is so great. The fall is, have trouble eating or eat too much, have trouble sleeping or sleep too much, have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, to go to school or go to work, but rallies in the afternoon. It's like a different person in the afternoon. Here's what you don't say to somebody who's depressed: pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? Here's what you say to someone, probably an adult who you believe is depressed: I'm here for you and I mean it. I know you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news: with time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time, I'll help you get the treatment. And then you have to ask them, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. Are you? And if you can't ask that question, find somebody who can ask it just that way. Now, there's an old urban legend: you should never mention the suicide word in front of somebody who's depressed. And I love the reasoning, because it might give them the idea. Suicide, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it's crossed my mind. Now, let's say they're not forthcoming about their thoughts. Let's say a young person, and they're, you ask them that question: are you having thoughts of suicide? And they say no, but you suspect that they might. What sort of behaviors are you looking for? Well, we talked about one: getting your affairs in order and giving away prized possessions, because you want to make sure they go to the people you want them to go to. Giving away a pet, a treasured pet animal, is top of that pyramid. They're collecting the means to die by suicide, whether it's medication or buying a firearm. They talk about death and dying. You catch them, you look at their internet history, and they've been Googling death and dying, or death and dying appears in their artwork, their music as a theme, their writing. I've got a friend whose son died by suicide, and he had a terrible heroin habit. and she thought he was simply a junkie. She didn't realize he was self-medicated for mental illness. And he was a singer and a songwriter. And he carried a notebook with him all the time in which he wrote his lyrics and music. And he never let it out of his sight. He would take it to the bathroom with him when he was home, so his mother couldn't see it. She realized later. Because when she got the notebook and she opens it up and she's going through the lyrics, it's like putting that puzzle together. It's all right there. So it appears as a theme in their artwork, their music, their writing. Here's a really dangerous one. They've been depressed for seems like ever, and then all of a sudden, happy beyond measure. No apparent reason. And you're happy because thank God they're happy. They may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end, so they're happy. So with young people, what you're looking for is a pattern. Do you catch them Googling death and dying? Do they talk, to you about death and dying? Again, giving away prized possessions. What happened to your Xbox? I gave it to Bobby. What? Like the guy in the golf clubs. Are you okay? Yeah, why do you ask? Well, because Frank said. So that's, yeah, and there's a young man that was chronicled on my newsfeed not long ago where he couldn't convince his parents that he was truly depressed and suicidal. Because nobody wants their kid to be anything but perfect. And they tried to write it off as puberty and teenage angst. And finally, what he started doing was when he went to bed at night, left his laptop open, and on the screen he had Googled how to kill yourself.
Wow.
And this is, I'm sorry, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I somehow activated on, this is a Mac, and it's my first Mac, and some way to activate phone calls coming in on your Mac, and I want to stop, and I have no idea. Okay. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna turn my phone off. I don't know if that's gonna do the trick, but hey, yeah. And what the problem with it, Sarah, is I'm sure there's a button there somewhere at the bottom that like don't answer or can I call you back, and I have no idea.
Okay.
It's my new refurbished Mac. Anyway, I'm trying to remember where we was. Yeah, suicide, and he would leave the computer open, and on the screen it said in the search box, "How to kill yourself?" ? And finally, they walked by the computer, noticed what was on the screen, and took him seriously, and he's still alive today because of it. So sometimes, it's difficult for parents to wrap their mind around. And I did it's called the American Association of Suicidology, and I did a TED style talk, and they had a woman talking about teenage, young person suicide, and they put up a picture of this goth individual, the black and the tattoos and black, and you go, it's pretty easy to see this kid killing himself. And then next picture is, the football quarterback with the short hair and the good, the all-American good looks and the scholarship. Oftentimes young people who are suicidal are not the goth loser, nerd, whatever. They're the high achieving athletes, immensely popular, just got a scholarship to go play football somewhere and gone. So, it's, I think we ought to teach in school, in addition to physical education, mental health class. Yeah. Because young people as young as middle school are reporting self-reported anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And so, we need to be able to spot that and then, take action. And doesn't necessarily have to be medication, mental health evaluation, some therapy, resolve some issues.
Mm-hmm.
If medication is indicated, then the thing about medication is if it doesn't work, there's a DNA cheek swab test, like Ancestry. They take your DNA and they match it to the, let's say, antidepressant that works best with your metabolism.
Wow.
So you get a lot less go on, got to taper off, go on, didn't work, taper off, go on. So a lot less lab rat. More, it's not perfect, but it does help to dial in
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple $100 generally. Most insurances, not all, pay for it. But
That's
a
cool.
lot of people don't
And were
know.
you medicated, like you had been married or you went from 23 to 56, and then you told your wife, before she watched it on YouTube, but were
Yeah.
you medicated at that time?
No, except that in 95, when things got really bad, I'm sorry, 85. No, 95. Married to my second wife, and that's when I realized that it wasn't situational. That everything was going well. Mortgage was paid off, money in the bank, bookings, and I got wretchedly depressed and suicidal. And I thought I got to take something. So there's an over-the-counter supplement called SAM-E, SAM-E. You can buy it at Costco. 400 milligrams in the morning on an empty stomach every day, and it was just enough to take the edge off. Apparently, it's very good double-blind study on mild depression. So it was just enough to take the edge off every day. Then I turned 60. My wife said, "Look, ask your doctor. See if you can get a little something, something." So I said to him, "I'd like to try an antidepressant." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like." And he couldn't grab his prescription pad fast enough. And I take something called Wellbutrin, a small to 150 milligrams, and it worked. My wife noticed in 2 weeks. At 3-week mark, I had this thought, first time since before I got married, was I like my life. It just came up unbidden. I mean, I got a good life anyway, but that thought, that had never bubbled up for like decades. And I thought, second thought was, why didn't I take this stuff earlier?
Mm-hmm.
So I still take the same thing. And it doesn't make me giddy, but it takes the edge off, shortens I usually have a 3-day cycle, can shorten it a bit, and it's spread out the time between the flat spot on the wheel. Don't have it as often as with the antidepressant.
Why do you think that people are usually, so if people don't have any type of mental illness, why do you think people shy away from it so much? They make it so awkward when they don't know anything about mental illness.
Well, I think some people think it's contagious. And a
Oh.
mask is not going to protect you. No, I think either A, they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, or B, they have no idea what to say. And so, what? It's sort of where alcoholism was, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years ago. There's a reason Alcoholics Anonymous was anonymous. Because back then, people thought it was a character flaw or a moral failing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people still feel like, because you can't see it, that mental illness is a character flaw, a weakness. And kind of like alcoholism, before everybody realized that drug addiction, alcoholism, substance abuse disorder was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people say to me, just choose joy. Unless you're talking about dishwashing liquid, I think we're out of luck. Don't you think if I could have done that, I'd done it 40 years ago?
Absolutely.
So it's a lack of knowledge. And so when I speak to audiences, part of what I talk about is for the people in the audience who are mentally ill, like they might have, what I have. The other part of the talk is for the neurotypical, to help them understand what the people with mental illness are going through. It's not a choice. It's not choosing joy. It's, it's not, don't worry, be happy. So educate the neurotypicals, because here's the simile that I use. There's a Greek character named Sisyphus. He gave fire to man, and his punishment was the other gods got together and they made him roll a rock up a hill every day. And if he got the rock over the top of the hill, he could retire. That was the deal. But he'd get right near the top of the hill and the rock roll back down every day. Having a mental illness is like that. Every morning you wake up, there's a rock and a hill. Some days the rock is small, the hill's not so steep. Some days the rock is a boulder and the hill is Kilimanjaro. But every day there's a rock and a hill, regardless. And that's what having mental illness is like. And I tell my audiences, look, I'm here to make sure that when you wake up tomorrow morning, you can still move that rock.
That is a noble thing to do for everything that you've been through. And I have no idea what that feels like. And I have had depression myself, and I live in a very small town, and someone had asked one of my family members, is Sarah still crazy? And right? Like, who even says that? And I think now I might remember who said it. I mean, it's so insignificant to me at the time, but mine was more, I cried all the time. I could not be with anyone, even my family members. All I did was cry. Like, I had this horrible anxiety and depression. And there was definitely a few times where I thought, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, that would be okay, because I don't know, and I haven't thought that way I'm sure 2001 was the last time I thought that. But it is, like, it can affect anyone, and I think people need to realize that. And I'm so glad that you said it. There's not a stereotypical person for this can absolutely happen to anyone. You see the commercials. Do you think that this is accurate? You see the commercials of the person who gets out of bed and they're frowning and sad, and they grab their face and they put the smiley face on and they go out. Is that what it's more like?
Very much so. Great actors. There's a reason I have a Screen Actors Guild card. Is because I acted for 56 years.
You did.
Yeah, and it's I mean, to my detriment. It's important, I think, for you to come out to trusted people love and trust, because you're going to need a pit crew when the wheels fall off. It's like a NASCAR race. You don't hire the pit crew as you're rolling into the pit.
True.
You pretty much have them lined up so they could be there. They know what you're going through. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to do what they call in the mental health business, should all over you. You should do this and you should do that. They're there for you. We've written 3 books on men's mental health in a series of 4 books. We're working on book number 4. It's 12 stories of 12 guys each book, like Chicken Soup for the Soul. Only it wrapped around men's struggles. And we made it look like an automobile owner's manual, so guys would pick it up. And it's full of automobile metaphors like that. Like, don't you wish your the man in your life, any man in your life, had a check engine light, like a mental check engine light. Light goes off, he goes to the mental mechanic. Guy puts him up on the rack and goes, Bob, no wonder you're depressed. You're 2 quarts low on serotonin. Yeah, it's again, I call myself crazy, but again, I can do that because what I'm trying to do is take that word back. As gay people, some decided, we're taking back the word queer. We're tired of it being a pejorative. So we're gonna reclaim that word and use it about ourselves and make it so it's not a pejorative, so it doesn't have the impact on us that it did, previously. So I call myself crazy all the time, but again, I am crazy.
I don't know what I expected. I don't know if I expected to laugh as much during this conversation, which I should have, because I'm talking to a comedian, but I definitely want people who are listening to know that Frank nor I find this to be a joke at all. But no. Frank relates to people really well on this subject, being lighthearted. And I really think, Frank, just speaking with you, that you probably reach way more people than someone who comes out and is super serious. And because people are going to shut that off. They're going to stop listening to someone who is just telling you what to do and telling you what to look for in such a monotone voice. You are really bringing it to people in a much easier to digest way.
Well, and this is to your previous point. People have an idea in their mind, I think, what mental illness looks and sounds like. And so if you tune into a podcast and there's a guy on there, he's a comedian, he's obviously high functioning, got a good life, but lives with these, hopefully it changes their perception of what it looks and sounds like to be mentally ill. And so they, if you change perception, you could change prejudices and then eventually behavior. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of why I do what I do, is I want people to see me on stage and think, because it's like cognitive dissonance. You can't hold what you thought mental illness looked and sounded like in your head when you're watching me, who, with mentally ill. You can't hold those 2 thoughts simultaneously. So that's another reason I speak, is to educate neurotypical people on what mental illness, that what you believe mental illness looks and sounds like may not be a fact.
Mm-hmm. And what can we do? What can the average Joe who does not struggle with mental illness, how can we help?
Well, people ask me that. I've got a friend who's depressed. What do I do? Well, first of all, don't do anything. Just simply listen. I give out my phone number every podcast and every keynote, 858-405-5653. And you can put it in the show notes, 858-405-5653. And I say to people, look, if you're suicidal, call the suicide prevention lifeline or whatever, or text the text line, text help to 741-741. If you're just having a bad day, call a crazy person. Here's my cell number. Because I'm not going to judge. You don't have to explain anything. I'm just going to co-sign whatever BS you're waiting for.
Mhm.
And that's what you want to do. You just want to be the shoulder to cry on, or just listen, actively listen, non-judgmentally, and offer your help. Let me help you get some help with this.
I love that. So let's end on a positive note. I think that was a positive note. I think that's amazing that you gave out your number, and yes, I will put it in the show notes. But what is one of your favorite things about being a comedian, or one of your favorite times from being a comedian?
Writing jokes for Jay Leno for 20 years. From the time he was just the permanent guest host until he took over the show, till the show ended for him. I wrote jokes. He hired a bunch of road comics, we would call ourselves, back in the day. And most of them he let go. They were under contract. Let the contract players go when he took over the Tonight Show. But myself and some other folks, he kept us on.
Mhm.
And I would have a joke or two in the monologue every week, which meant that there's an in-house staff who are writing as well. But that meant my joke on that topic was better than anything they came out with, which is that. And on his very first show, when he took over for Johnny, I had 2 jokes on his very first show. That was probably the,
Wow.
Yep.
That's
And
very
he's a
cool.
nice guy. When I had my first heart surgery, when I got out of ICU and picked up my message from my message machine, hey, it's Jay Leno. Somebody told him I was having heart surgery, one of the other writers. Heard you had heart surgery. Good thing you didn't have it in LA. They take it out and leave it out. So yeah, that was probably, the peak of my comedy writing career.
That's awesome. Well, here we are talking to a celebrity, because you wrote for the Tonight Show. You have several TEDx talks, and that's
6.
a big deal. That is
All on mental health.
that's a big deal.
I know people are amazed. What? A comedian? 6 TEDx talks? But I'm passionate about the topic. I'm getting ready to do my 6th one, June 7th, I think.
Wow. And you're an author?
Yeah, 2 co-authors and I have written it's called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. It's a men's mental health manual, basically. Lots of exercises and resources and stories of guys. Because guys told us, if you're going to write a book about men's mental health to help us, we want real guys, real stories, and how they're really coping. Because guys tend to take advice from guys.
Absolutely.
That's what they told us.
I love it. I love how passionate you are about helping people, and I'm very grateful that you are here, be able to tell everyone your story, because I think you are encouraging people daily to do better, live better, be better, and that is my goal, and you are living that to a T.
Well, and one last thing, because you mentioned this, and I'll let it go by. You said you had times when you thought, if I didn't wake up in the morning, that would be okay. And that's called passive suicidality. People say, look, I'd never kill myself, but if I didn't wake up. And you hear kids or people who are traumatized as children often say, I would go to bed at night praying I wouldn't wake up. I wouldn't kill myself, but if I didn't wake up, that would be fine. So there may be somebody listening who's had that experience.
Passive. That's what it is.
Passive suicidality. Yep. You're suicidal. You're just not going to actively end your life. But, you get hit by a bus, great.
Wow. I've learned some new terms today.
Yeah. Well, hopefully your listeners, maybe somebody out there, Sarah, has chronic suicidal ideation.
Mhm.
They didn't know it had a name. They thought they were just some kind of freak. And because of our conversation, they realized for the first time in their life that they are in fact not alone. I mean, that to me could be life changing.
They gave me goosebumps when you just said it. And that is the goal. That is the goal, to make sure that people know that there is help. There are people out there that will just listen, not tell you to take fish oil, and or do yoga or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right. Have you meditated? Yeah, I've thought about killing you a couple times. Yeah.
I'm sure that cannot be an easy thing. That can't be easy when everyone's trying to fix your problems but I am still in awe that you dealt with this for 33 years before anyone knew about it. I mean, that is talk about a silent killer, really.
Yep. And I understand, people, when they suggest things like fish oil, they mean well. They're not mean.
They do.
they do mean well, but they don't know what else to say, you know, and they just assume it can be, you know, can be fixed.
Yep. All right. What's
One
your
piece of good. Are you in Canada?
North Dakota?
North Dakota, close enough. South Saskatchewan. The Have you been to the Medora musical?
I love Medora.
I was there. I did 2 weeks one summer in North Dakota. I did, you know, because they do the roping and the singing and
Yes.
they have a variety act, and when they rotate every 2 weeks, and I did the Medora musical for 2 weeks.
Really? When?
Yeah.
I want to know because I want to know if I was there because we go there every year.
Yeah, it's been 20 years ago, I'm guessing. It's been probably late 1900s, early 2000s.
Okay,
Yeah,
so did you have a joke? Because I will never forget this joke. I was at one once where the comedian said something about when you go home and you write a letter to someone, you don't have to put postage on it. You can just put their name, you know, or put their name in the return area and put your name in the to the addressee. Was that you who said that?
no, it was not
Oh.
me.
God, if that would have been you, that would have blown my mind because I remember I was little and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I could send a letter without paying for postage.
That's correct. Well, and I'll tell you how long ago it was, is I had to drive to Dickinson to get internet service, and it was in a bar.
Oh my.
In the middle of the day, I'm in a dark bar only because I'd buy a beer and let it sit and then do the internet because there was no internet in Medora at the time.
Really? So
Yeah.
did you like Medora?
It was a lovely little town. When I saw the 2,500 seat amphitheater in a town that has 90 permanent residents, I thought there's no way.
Yep. No,
But people come in by bus after bus after. It's amazing. 7 days a week.
it is. Well, I love it. I love that you've been there. So yes, if you ever get back there, please, if you ever end up there, please let me know because
I will let you know. I've always hoped I could go back because I had a lot of fun. And a lot of young kids, you know, it's doing the roping and the singing and the dancing and all that stuff.
it is definitely fun. What do you have to say for our closing? Any very last thoughts that you have for people?
Yes, you can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it by doing something as simple as what we're doing right here, and that's start a conversation with somebody who's struggling.